It was economically expedient to enslave people and to make that slavery perpetual and hereditary.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for historical events that not only shaped history, but still echo in today's politics, society, and culture.
But as negotiations get underway, Wilson quickly realizes that each country has come to the table with their own agenda.
The Partition of India. The partition of British India in 1947 gave rise to the creation of two nations, India and Pakistan.
One of the largest, most ethnically diverse nations in the world has been divided. One country will now become two, India and Pakistan. As a British barrister draws a line on a map, a once peaceful land implodes.
The division was a harried affair, marking the beginning of one of the greatest migrations in human history. The mass migrations triggered horrific communal violence between Hindus and Muslims. Millions became displaced, with many more dying in the ensuing chaos. The decision was largely defined by religious lines and frictions.
Partition unleashed a wave of bloodshed. One of the central flashpoints was Punjab. People who suddenly found themselves in the wrong country had to flee from their ancestral homes, on foot, on bullock carts, or by train.
The partition continues to profoundly influence the South Asian political landscape, as evidenced by the fraught relationship between the neighboring nations. While independence was a welcome change, the partition served as a stark warning of the challenges of decolonization, nation-building, and the lasting human cost of political decisions made under immense pressure.
The border created in 1947 would become the focus for 3 wars and 60 years of animosity between the government of India and Pakistan.
The CIA-backed coup in Iran. Who would have thought that refusing to concede to Western oil demands would result in a covert coup d'etat?
The military action culminated months of secret planning by British and American intelligence agencies as part of a plot to overthrow the Iranian government.
But that is exactly what happened in 1953, when the CIA orchestrated a coup that overthrew Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The Prime Minister had nationalized the oil industry. In an effort to protect British oil interests, the U.S. supported a coup to restore the Shah's authoritarian rule.
An American-backed general became the new prime minister to form a government that expanded the powers of the Shah.
The U.S.'s intervention led to deepening rifts and instabilities, culminating in the 1979 Iranian Revolution and enduring anti-American sentiment that persists today. The coup is a classic example of foreign interference and Cold War-era covert operations that prioritized geopolitical interests over democracy and human rights.
The memory of 1953 would linger in the minds of Iranians for years to come.
The use of Agent Orange in the Vietnam War. Agent Orange is a toxic herbicide that featured prominently during the Vietnam War.
During the Vietnam War, Americans were told that spraying millions of acres of dense jungle with Agent Orange would deprive the Viet Cong of cover and save GIs' lives.
The U.S. military sprayed millions of gallons of it to defoliate the dense forests of Vietnam and weed out enemy positions. While the approach was effective as a military tactic, Agent Orange caused irreparable health effects among Vietnamese civilians and soldiers and even American veterans.
Thousands of Vietnam veterans think Agent Orange is now killing them.
From cancers and birth defects to lingering environmental contamination, the use of the herbicide illustrates the horrific reality of chemical warfare. Agent Orange has sparked countless legal battles and demands for accountability. Today, it serves as a symbol of the long-term consequences of war extending beyond the battlefield and ongoing efforts for veteran health care and environmental restoration.
The U.S. has contributed some $155 million to support victims and cleanup projects in Vietnam. But as Washington continues to trim aid around the world, fears are rising that support for Agent Orange victims will disappear, and that could result in even more victims.
The establishment of apartheid. In 1948, South Africa's National Party implemented a legalized system of racial segregation and discrimination.
The word itself stems from the South African dialect of Dutch Afrikaans and literally means apartness. But for millions in South Africa, it held a much darker reality.
It was designed to maintain white minority rule over the majority black population, from controlling where people could live, work, and socialize to enforcing inequality in every aspect of daily life. The apartheid set the stage for brutal suppression of the opposition.
The party's goal was to separate South Africa's white minority from its non-white majority, in addition to separating non-whites from each other. They did this by putting in place hundreds of race laws touching every aspect of life.
The event sparked international condemnation and sanctions, but lasted several decades. It wasn't until the early 1990s that apartheid officially ended, with the election of Nelson Mandela and the establishment of a multiracial democracy, leaving behind a legacy of racial injustice and division. The apartheid is a lesson in the dangers of institutionalized discrimination.
And never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
The Balfour Declaration, a statement symptomatic of human ignorance. The Balfour Declaration was a letter from the British government in 1917.
Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, penned a letter that would change the face of the Middle East.
Issued during World War I, the Declaration expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, while not accounting for political and cultural complexities, not to mention the Arab population already living in the region.
But the Arabs, who had been living in Palestine for centuries, turned increasingly to resistance and violence, culminating in a revolt in 1936.
Contributing to decades of conflict, displacement, and war in the Middle East, the Balfour Declaration remains a controversial milestone that has affected millions of lives and reshaped international diplomacy. In retrospect, the Declaration underscores the significant impact of colonial area decisions by foreign powers on various far-reaching and unresolved geopolitical events.
The context is colonization. Those three forces, those three powers, are a colonized power. And they divided the land of the so-called the Levant in that context. And they left Palestine in a way that, without a political status.
The Rwandan Genocide. Ranked among the most horrific events of the 20th century is the Rwandan Genocide of 1994.
Within hours, a campaign of violence spread from the capital Kigali throughout the country, which will not stop for 3 months.
Over a period of 100 days, ethnic Hutu extremists massacred nearly 800,000 Tutsis and some moderate Hutu and Twa people. The international community's failure to intervene left the world to watch in shock as countless lives were lost.
The failure to protect the Tutsis from genocide not only played out on the ground in Rwanda, but also at the UN headquarters, where several cables were ignored.
Fueled by long-lasting ethnic tensions and political power struggles, the Rwandan Genocide reshaped global policies on humanitarian intervention and peacekeeping. The mass violence that resulted in the genocide demonstrates the consequences of hatred and indifference. Rwanda's tragedy now serves to emphasize the need for the protection of vulnerable populations worldwide.
It is now illegal to talk about ethnicity in Rwanda. The government says this is to prevent more bloodshed, but some say it also prevents true reconciliation and is just putting a lid on tensions which might only boil over again in the future.
The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In August 1945, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombings forced Japan's surrender and ended World War II.
The war was over. At last, the troops were going home.
Between 150 and 250,000 people were killed, and an entire region was poisoned by radiation. The immense civilian casualties and destruction in the aftermath of the bombings ushered in a new era known as the Atomic Age.
At 11:02 a.m., the B-29 dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki.
To this day, the bombings continue to spark fierce ethical debates about nuclear warfare. They are a powerful reminder of the human cost of nuclear war and have inspired global movements for nuclear disarmament. The Indian Removal Act. What started as negotiations in the 1830s became a systematic effort by the U.S. government to forcibly relocate Native American tribes from their ancestral lands.
In 1829, Andrew Jackson was elected U.S. president. He believed that Native Americans had no rights to their land and began proceedings to remove the Cherokee from the southern states.
The goal was to claim the lands for settlers. Signed by President Andrew Jackson, the act tragically led to the Trail of Tears, where thousands of indigenous people died during the relocations. Decades later, the Dawes Act of 1887 exacerbated the situation. Breaking up tribal lands into individual plots, the act further undermined indigenous tribal sovereignty and their way of life.
Thousands of Native Americans were pulled from their homes in Georgia and other states across the South. Many were shackled in chains and forced to walk at gunpoint more than 1,000 miles west.
The devastating effects of the two laws are still felt today in what was essentially an act of genocide. The Treaty of Versailles. World War I officially ended with this treaty on June 28, 1919. The treaty's goal was to weaken Germany and prevent further aggression.
But for the winners of the war, punishing Germany was just one of their tasks. They also hoped to create something new, a future without such wars.
Unfortunately, it achieved this by imposing harsh reparations and territorial losses on Germany, fueling economic hardships and political instability. These conditions made it easier for the rise of dictators like Adolf Hitler and the eventual declaration of World War II. The treaty also redrew borders and created new nations.
Hundreds of people had come to Paris out of the crumbled empires of Central Europe and the Middle East. Poles, Czechs, Kurds, Ukrainians, and many others wanted recognition for their causes, their ethnic and national identities, or help settling territorial disputes.
Many of these decisions were made without consideration of existing ethnic and cultural realities. What was originally intended to secure a lasting peace instead became a symbol of failed diplomacy and an example of unintended consequences in international relations.
The flawed legacy of 1919 would continue into the next century, leaving the League's successor, the United Nations, to respond.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications.
The Transatlantic Slave Trade. Lasting more than 3 centuries, the slave trade enabled the forcible transportation of millions of Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas.
13 million innocent victims, just like Equiano, would be stolen from their homes and sent into slavery.
Enslaved people experienced brutal conditions and were considered property under the law. The slave trade fueled the economies of European colonies and the rise of the plantation system in the Americas. The human suffering was immense.
Being black in the United States was at some level a mark of slavery. Blackness was understood to be a mark of degradation, which went along with slavery.
Families were torn apart forever, indigenous cultures were disrupted, and countless lives were lost. The transatlantic slave trade set the foundation for systemic racism and social inequalities, with a legacy that endures to this day in the fight for civil rights across the globe.
People tend to believe that slavery is a thing of the past, and interestingly, in the United States particularly, we tend to pat ourselves on the back and say, well, we got rid of slavery. But there are something like 27 million people in slavery today.
Which of these historic blunders do you think caused the most damage? Let us know in the comments.
The letter, published on November 2nd, 1917, led to the creation of the State of Israel and would spark almost a century of conflict.